The warm summer breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the open window, gently rustling the curtains as Sarah sat at her desk, lost in thought. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, poised to type, but her mind was elsewhere. The blank document on her computer screen seemed to mock her, a stark reminder of the words she couldn't bring herself to write. Sarah was a successful romance novelist, known for her ability to weave intricate tales of love and passion. But lately, her own life had become a story more complex and heart-wrenching than any she had ever penned. At 35, she had it all: a loving husband, 2 beautiful children, and a career that allowed her to work from the comfort of her suburban home. Yet, something was missing. A void she couldn't quite explain. She glanced at the framed family photo on her desk, guilt washing over her as she thought of Mark, her husband of 10 years. He was everything she had ever wanted: kind, supportive, and a wonderful father. So why did her heart race at the thought of another man? David had entered her life 6 months ago, a fellow author she had met at a writers' conference. At first, their connection had been purely professional, a shared passion for storytelling and a mutual admiration for each other's work. But as they began collaborating on a joint project, something shifted. Late-night phone calls to discuss plot points turned into deep conversations about life, dreams, and regrets. Innocent text messages evolved into flirtatious exchanges that left Sarah breathless and yearning for more. She knew it was wrong. The rational part of her brain screamed at her to end it, to focus on her family and the life she had built. But the heart wants what it wants. And Sarah found herself falling deeper into a web of forbidden desires and stolen moments. A ping from her phone startled her out of her reverie. It was a message from David. "Thinking of you. Can't wait to see you tomorrow." Sarah's heart fluttered as she read the words, a mixture of excitement and dread coursing through her veins. Tomorrow was their monthly writers' group meeting, an excuse to see each other in person under the guise of professional networking. She both longed for and dreaded these encounters, knowing that each time she saw David, it became harder to deny her feelings. She was about to reply when she heard the front door open, followed by the sound of little feet running down the hallway. "Mommy!" Her 5-year-old daughter Lily called out as she burst into the study, her pigtails bouncing with each step. Sarah quickly locked her phone and turned to greet her daughter with a forced smile. "Hi, sweetie. How was school today?" As Lily launched into an animated recount of her day, Sarah's gaze drifted to the doorway where Mark stood, watching them with a loving smile. The guilt that had been simmering in her stomach intensified, threatening to overwhelm her. "Everything okay?" Mark asked, noticing the tension in her shoulders. Sarah nodded, forcing another smile. "Just a bit of writer's block. Nothing to worry about." Mark crossed the room and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. "You'll figure it out. You always do." If only he knew the true nature of her struggle, Sarah thought bitterly. How could she explain that the block wasn't in her writing, but in her heart? That she was torn between the safety and stability of their life together and the passionate, all-consuming desire she felt for another man. As the evening wore on, Sarah went through the motions of family life, helping Lily with her homework, preparing dinner, and tucking both children into bed. But her mind was elsewhere, constantly drifting to thoughts of David and their impending meeting. Later that night, as she lay in bed next to Mark, Sarah stared at the ceiling, sleep eluding her. The steady rhythm of her husband's breathing only served to amplify the chaos in her mind. She thought about the life she had built, the vows she had made, and the 2 innocent children sleeping down the hall. How could she even contemplate throwing it all away for a man she barely knew? But then she thought of David, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his latest story idea, the electricity she felt when their hands accidentally brushed, the deep understanding that seemed to pass between them without words. It was a connection she had never experienced before, not even with Mark in the early days of their relationship. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, Sarah made a decision. She would go to the writers' group meeting, but she would end things with David once and for all. It was the right thing to do, the responsible choice. She repeated this mantra to herself as she got ready for the day, trying to ignore the pang of sadness that accompanied her resolution. The community center where the writers' group met was bustling with activity when Sarah arrived. She took a deep breath before entering the room, steeling herself for the inevitable encounter with David. As she pushed open the door, her eyes immediately found him, as if drawn by an invisible force. David looked up from his notebook, a smile spreading across his face as he saw her. Sarah felt her resolve weakening, her carefully rehearsed speech evaporating from her mind. She made her way to an empty seat, deliberately choosing one far from David, but she could feel his gaze following her every move. Throughout the meeting, Sarah struggled to focus on the discussion at hand. Her eyes kept drifting to David, taking in the way his brow furrowed in concentration as he listened to others speak, the passionate gestures he made when sharing his own ideas. Each glance they exchanged was charged with unspoken emotions, a silent conversation that only they could understand. As the meeting drew to a close, Sarah knew she couldn't put off the inevitable any longer. She waited until most of the group had filed out before approaching David, her heart pounding in her chest. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. They made their way to a small courtyard behind the community center, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Sarah took a deep breath, willing herself to say the words she had rehearsed countless times. "David, we can't do this anymore." The pain that flashed across his face was almost unbearable to witness. "Sarah, please. I know it's complicated, but what we have, it's real. You can't deny that." She closed her eyes, fighting back tears. "It doesn't matter if it's real. I have a family, responsibilities. We both do. Whatever this is between us, it has to end." David stepped closer, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek. Sarah knew she should pull away, but she found herself leaning into his touch, savoring what she told herself would be their last moment of intimacy. "Tell me you don't love me," David whispered, his breath warm against her skin. "Tell me you don't feel this connection between us, and I'll walk away. I'll never bother you again." Sarah opened her mouth to speak, to say the words that would end this torment once and for all. But as she looked into David's eyes, she found herself unable to lie. "I can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "God help me, I can't say it." In that moment, all of Sarah's carefully constructed barriers crumbled. She surged forward, capturing David's lips in a desperate, passionate kiss. It was everything she had imagined and more, electric, all-consuming, and utterly terrifying in its intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and trembling, Sarah knew that her life would never be the same. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. "What do we do now?" David asked, his forehead resting against hers. Sarah shook her head, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. "I don't know. I need time to think." She pulled away, gathering what remained of her composure. "I have to go. The kids. Mark, I can't." David nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here, Sarah, always." As Sarah drove home, her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The taste of David's kiss still lingered on her lips, a constant reminder of the choice she now faced. She thought of Mark and the children, of the life they had built together. Could she really throw it all away for a chance at a different kind of happiness? The house was quiet when she arrived home, the afternoon sun casting a warm glow through the windows. Sarah found a note from Mark on the kitchen counter. "Took the kids to the park. Back soon. Love you." Those two simple words, "love you," felt like a dagger to her heart. She sank into a chair at the kitchen table, burying her face in her hands as the tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. How had she let things get this far? She had always prided herself on being a good person, a faithful wife, a devoted mother. But now, she felt like a fraud, living a double life that threatened to destroy everything she held dear. As she sat there, lost in her turmoil, Sarah's gaze fell on the family calendar hanging on the wall. Circled in red was a date 2 weeks from now, her and Mark's wedding anniversary. They had been planning a weekend getaway, a chance to reconnect and celebrate their love. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Sarah. Here she was, contemplating the end of her marriage, while simultaneously preparing to celebrate it. She thought of all the years she and Mark had shared, the good times and the bad, the challenges they had overcome together. Was she really willing to throw all of that away for the promise of something new and exciting with David? But then she thought of the passion she felt with David, the deep intellectual and emotional connection that had been missing from her life for so long. Was it fair to stay in a marriage where something so fundamental was lacking? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the kitchen, Sarah heard the sound of laughter approaching the house. Moments later, the front door burst open, and Lily came running in, closely followed by her younger brother, Jake. "Mommy, we saw ducks at the park!" Lily exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. Sarah forced a smile, pushing her tumultuous thoughts aside as she hugged her children. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Did you feed them?" As Lily launched into a detailed account of their adventure, Mark entered the kitchen, a tired but content smile on his face. He leaned down to kiss Sarah's cheek, and she had to resist the urge to flinch, the guilt of her earlier actions weighing heavily on her conscience. "Everything okay?" Mark asked, noticing the redness around her eyes. "You look like you've been crying." Sarah shook her head, mustering up another fake smile. "Just a bit emotional about a story I'm working on. You know how I get sometimes." Mark nodded, accepting her explanation without question. His trust in her only served to intensify Sarah's guilt. How could she betray this man who had stood by her side for so many years, who had never given her reason to doubt his love and commitment? As the evening progressed, Sarah went through the motions of family life, helping with homework, preparing dinner, engaging in light conversation. But internally, she was in turmoil, her mind constantly replaying the kiss she had shared with David. Later that night, as she lay in bed next to Mark, Sarah stared at the ceiling, sleep eluding her once again. She thought about the two paths that lay before her, staying with Mark and her family, or pursuing a new life with David. Both choices came with their own set of consequences, joys, and heartaches. If she stayed with Mark, she would be honoring her vows and providing stability for her children. She would be the person she had always thought herself to be, loyal, dependable, selfless. But would she ever truly be happy? Would she spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been, longing for a passion she had only briefly tasted? On the other hand, if she chose David, she would be following her heart, embracing a love that felt more intense and all-consuming than anything she had ever experienced. But at what cost? She would break Mark's heart, potentially damage her children's trust in her, and forever alter the course of all their lives. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, Sarah made a decision. She would take the next 2 weeks, until her anniversary trip with Mark, to truly examine her feelings and the potential consequences of her choices. She would distance herself from David during this time, focusing on her family and her marriage. Only then, with a clear head and heart, would she make her final decision. The next morning, Sarah sent a brief message to David, explaining that she needed time and space to think things through. His response was understanding but tinged with sadness, and Sarah had to resist the urge to call him, to hear his voice and reassure him of her feelings. Instead, she threw herself into family life with renewed vigor. She planned special outings with the children, arranged date nights with Mark, and made a conscious effort to reconnect with the man she had married all those years ago. As the days passed, Sarah found herself rediscovering aspects of her relationship with Mark that she had forgotten or taken for granted. His quiet strength, his unwavering support of her dreams, the way he could make her laugh even on her worst days. All of these qualities reminded her of why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. But even as she reconnected with Mark, thoughts of David continued to linger in the back of her mind. She found herself comparing the two men, weighing the comfort and stability of her marriage against the passion and excitement of her connection with David. One evening, about a week into her self-imposed period of reflection, Sarah was tucking Lily into bed when her daughter asked a question that caught her off guard. "Mommy, Are you and Daddy going to be together forever?" Sarah felt her heart constrict at the innocent query. She sat on the edge of Lily's bed, smoothing her daughter's hair as she considered how to respond. "Why do you ask that, sweetie?" Lily shrugged, her small face scrunched up in thought. "Tommy at school said his parents don't live together anymore because they don't love each other. But you and Daddy love each other, right?" Sarah felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She pulled Lily into a tight hug, as much to hide her own emotions as to comfort her daughter. "Your Daddy and I love you and Jake very much," she said, carefully choosing her words. "And we will always be your parents, no matter what happens." As she left Lily's room, Sarah felt the weight of her decision more acutely than ever. It wasn't just her own happiness at stake, but the well-being and security of her children. Could she really justify tearing apart their world for the sake of her own desires? The days continued to pass, and soon it was the eve of Sarah and Mark's anniversary trip. They had planned a weekend getaway to a quaint bed and breakfast in the countryside, a chance to reconnect and celebrate their years together. As Sarah packed her bag, her hand brushed against something in the bottom of her closet, a notebook she had forgotten about. She pulled it out, recognizing it as the journal she had kept in the early years of her relationship with Mark. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Sarah began to flip through the pages. Her own handwriting, younger and more carefree, stared back at her. She read accounts of their first date, their engagement, the nerves and excitement of their wedding day. Each entry was filled with love, hope, and dreams for their future together. Tears began to fall as Sarah realized how far she had strayed from the woman who had written those words. She had been so certain then, so full of love for Mark. When had things changed? When had she started taking their relationship for granted? As she continued to read, Sarah came across an entry from just after Lily was born. She had written about the overwhelming love she felt for her daughter, but also about the deep gratitude she had for Mark, for his support during the difficult pregnancy, for his unwavering presence during the long nights with a newborn, for the way he looked at their daughter with such adoration. Sarah closed the journal, her mind whirling with memories and emotions. She thought about the life she and Mark had built together, the family they had created. She thought about David, about the passion and excitement he brought to her life, and she thought about the person she wanted to be, not just for herself, but for her children and for the vows she had made. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the bedroom window, Sarah made her decision. She picked up her phone, her heart heavy but her mind clear. "David," she said when he answered, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "We need to talk." Sarah's heart raced as she heard David's voice on the other end of the line. "Sarah, is everything okay?" She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. "David, I've made a decision. I can't see you anymore. What we had, it was beautiful. And in another life, maybe it could have been something more. But I have a family, a husband who loves me, and children who need me. I can't throw that away." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When David finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I understand. I always knew this was a possibility, but I guess I hoped. Are you sure this is what you want?" Sarah closed her eyes, fighting back tears. "It's not about what I want. It's about what's right. My family needs me, and I've made a commitment to them. I can't break that." "I respect your decision," David said softly. "But Sarah, please know that what we had was real. I'll always cherish the time we spent together." As they said their goodbyes, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and profound sadness wash over her. She knew she had made the right choice, but it didn't make the pain of letting go any easier. The next morning, as Sarah and Mark set off for their anniversary trip, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was determined to recommit herself to her marriage, to rediscover the love and passion that had brought them together in the first place. The bed and breakfast was just as charming as they had hoped, nestled in a picturesque valley surrounded by rolling hills. As they settled into their room, Mark surprised Sarah with a bouquet of her favorite flowers. "Happy anniversary, my love," he said, pulling her into a tender embrace. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat as she hugged him back. "Mark, there's something I need to tell you." He pulled back, concern etched on his face. "What is it? Is everything okay?" Taking a deep breath, Sarah led him to sit on the edge of the bed. She knew that if they were going to move forward, she needed to be honest about everything. "I haven't been entirely truthful with you," she began, her voice shaking. "For the past few months, I've been struggling with some feelings for someone else." Mark's face paled, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. Sarah poured out everything: her connection with David, the emotional affair that had developed, and the kiss they had shared. She spoke of her confusion, her guilt, and ultimately, her decision to recommit to their marriage. When she finished, the room was silent, save for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Sarah held her breath, waiting for Mark's reaction. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say. I suspected something was wrong, but I never imagined. Why are you telling me this now?" Sarah reached for his hand, relieved when he didn't pull away. "Because I want us to have a fresh start. No more secrets, no more hiding. I chose you, Mark. I chose our family. But I know I've hurt you, and I want us to work through this together." Mark was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had said. When he finally met her gaze, his eyes were filled with a mixture of pain and determination. "I won't pretend this doesn't hurt," he said, "but I appreciate your honesty. We've been through too much together to give up now. If you're willing to fight for us, then so am I." Over the next 2 days, Sarah and Mark talked more openly than they had in years. They discussed their fears, their disappointments, and their hopes for the future. They rediscovered the spark that had brought them together and made plans for how to keep that flame alive. As they drove home on Sunday evening, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust takes time, and there would undoubtedly be moments of doubt and pain. But she was committed to making it work. In the weeks and months that followed, Sarah threw herself into strengthening her relationship with Mark and her children. She and Mark began seeing a couples therapist, learning new ways to communicate and connect. They instituted weekly date nights and made a conscious effort to support each other's dreams and ambitions. Sarah also refocused on her writing, channeling her experiences into a novel that explored the complexities of love, commitment, and the choices we make. The process was cathartic, allowing her to work through her feelings and gain a deeper understanding of herself. As time passed, thoughts of David became less frequent, fading into a bittersweet memory of what might have been. Sarah knew she had made the right choice, but she also recognized that the experience had taught her valuable lessons about herself and her marriage. 1 year after her fateful decision, Sarah sat in her study, putting the finishing touches on her new novel. As she typed the final words, she felt a sense of closure and new beginnings. Mark appeared in the doorway, a proud smile on his face. "Finished?" Sarah nodded, returning his smile. "Finally. Want to read it?" As Mark settled into the chair beside her, Sarah felt a rush of love and gratitude. Their journey hadn't been easy, but they had emerged stronger, more honest, and more deeply connected than ever before. She knew that life would continue to present challenges and temptations, but Sarah was confident in the choice she had made. She had chosen love, not just the passionate, all-consuming love of new beginnings, but the deep, enduring love that grows stronger with each challenge overcome, each joy shared, and each year passed together. As she watched Mark begin to read her story, Sarah realized that she had finally found the ending she had been searching for all along. Not in the arms of a forbidden love, but in the warmth of the family she had built and the life she had chosen.